Okay. Today, September 7th, 2020, I, Maya Hill, the interviewer, will be interviewing Miss Beverly Rouse. Location, Zoom. The project this interview will be for is the Black Student Alumni Oral History Project. So welcome, Miss Rouse. I thank you for joining me today to just share in your experience. So just to jump right into the questions, when and where were you born?
I was born in Philadelphia, in West Philadelphia, actually, born and raised. No, in West Philadelphia. I was born in West Philadelphia, basically on the near, for those who are familiar, near 48th and Reno, which is near Haverford, that kind of area. In the middle, they called it. You know, they had a bottom at that time, a top in the middle, whatever that meant. Okay. But anyway, that's where I was born. Um, I'm the only child. I have brothers and sisters. I have no children. And so consequently, I kind of learn and still learning how to kind of entertain myself, uh, keep myself abreast of myself and that kind of stuff. So it worked for me. My mom was a nurse, practical nurse, and she went back later on to get certified. My dad was a carpenter, self-employed carpenter who had done work um, around the area, and he did some work, and I'll talk about that later with Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee and Sidney Poitier. So that kind of condition and cushion what I felt about the artistic world, which I'm very interested in. Um, but I had my, I would say I had an extended family because on our block there were, which we still get together, those of us who were still living, there were like about 10 of us, and we did everything in groups. So we still, and they were always in the same age grouping. They had younger siblings, but of course those siblings were not allowed because they weren't in our age grouping. So we did a lot of things together, and then I was kind of blessed in having a couple doors down a family of older, being 10, 12 years old, who was my babysitter actually. One of them was my babysitter. Later on, I became her babysitter for her children. So it passed on. So I was kind of blessed to be able to kind of listen to their stories and their kind of anecdotes and kind of little funny things and kind of take from those. So even though I was an only child, was never really lonely or never really alone. I have a friend, for example, who I'm still a friend with, who's artistic and fiber being. She does fibers, and she's been all over the world doing this. And she would come home during that time. Would come home during that time. So it's almost like having a sister. So it really, it was a great experience, a great block, and just great people.
So did you grow up in an integrated community or an all Black community, and how did that shape your outward view on, whether your outward view in going to school, and if you can mention like what schools you went to,
Sure.
and then leading into that college, how you desired to go to college?
Sure. Well, I went to an all Black elementary school, and of course we had junior high or middle school at that time. An all mostly Black, mostly 99% uh, middle school, and a mostly Black high school, West Philadelphia High School. But my middle school I was discussing with someone, my middle school experience at Salzburger Junior High School, which was junior high then, was just great because what happened there was we had during Black History Week, it was a week then, it wasn't a month. I had an English teacher who would dress up as different characters. One day she would be Sojourner Truth. One day she would be a Nefertiti. So she incorporated a lot of Black history in that. And because a lot of the teachers were of color, mostly Black of color, they had high standards. They were kind of young. They had probably had come out of, a lot of them had come out, I found out later on, had come out of Cheney and Westchester at the time. And they were really supportive in making sure that we got what we need to get to understand. So a lot of that interest in art and interest in Black history was really shaped by them, and shaped especially by this English teacher. I'm sorry, she wasn't an English teacher. She was a history teacher. history teacher who would do a lot of things. So I went to West Philadelphia High School, um, and I think even though I was raised in a black neighborhood per se, they were I had other experiences. My mother always took me to folk festivals, um, and I went to things like we always had books. We read about, we had magazines, and I say we because we always kind of read, all three of us. We had magazines, and we discussed things like Emmett Till when he was killed in 1955. So it was always a discussion going on about what was going on, about the world. When I was in high school, I went to, and this kind of shaped me. I was a mother's helper, so I went to Atlantic City to work for a Jewish family. Um, the next summer, I went to Wildwood to work as a chambermaid. So I had experiences around people, white people. So it wasn't, so when I went about in the 11th grade, in 7th grade, actually, I met a person, a friend of mine named Ronnie, who went to Penn State, who was going to Penn State. She had graduated. Um, this is later on, I'm moving forward now. She had graduated. Um, and when she graduated, I think 63, I was up at Penn State maybe in the 10-week period, maybe 2 or 3 times a semester. So by the time I went to Penn State, people thought I went to Penn State all the time. So I had an advantage because I was there a lot. I knew a lot of the people. I knew her brother and sister went to Penn State. And it was just a natural occurrence because I wanted to become a social worker, always did, or anthropologist. And I knew you weren't going to do that unless you went to school. So it was a natural occurrence for me to go to school. Um, I didn't go on a scholarship. I wish I had, because there weren't any many scholarships then at that time. Uh, However, I worked. So I had worked for the telephone company when I was in the 11th grade. So I had my own money. So when it came time for me to get a loan, I never had to ask anyone. They just automatically, I guess they said, well, she's working. We're gonna start her credit off. So I actually kind of paid for my own way, with of course dribblings from my parents, but I paid for my own way there. And I think sometimes that makes a difference because now you're more vested. You're not going to school, as my mother told me, you're not going to school for me, you're going to school for you. So the one time I decided I wasn't going back and I did a little hissy fit, my mother was like, okay, well, going for a job tomorrow? What's going on? So it was almost like, let me hurry up and get out of here. The other thing that did for me, I think, that kind of pushed me to school was to say to myself, do I want to really be a chambermaid? Okay,
Mm.
nothing wrong with that. Don't get me wrong, but I didn't want to do it. Do I really want to be a mother's helper, which is a glorified babysitter? So it was automatic for me to kind of just know I was going to a school. I only applied to Penn State because, of course, my friends, my cousin, at the time, if you had a good friend, they became your cousin. And to this day, people say, "How is your cousin?" I was like, "Well, my cousin is fine, who is not my cousin, but and we're still in touch." So, the big thing for us was always reading. Um, I was a reader, and so I always wanted to extend my world beyond where I was. And again, as I said, my mother, she kind of created a path to me for my artistic creativity because I went to dancing school since I was 7 till I was about 15 or 14. So dance was always around. Um, we danced at home. We practiced, my grouping of us from high school, we practiced 2 days a week on our bop and slop and all these other things that we did. So we always practiced in my home. So dance was always a part of what was going on. And, I grabbed my mother and made her dance with me, that kind of stuff. So by the time I got to Penn State, I was like there because before I went to the main campus, I went to Ogons. Went to Ogons for a year. At that time, they said that you had to be at branch campus for 2 years. But for some reason, the six of us who would drive up to Ogons every day, they told us all at the same time that we were accepted for the winter term of 66. So we started the main campus in the winter term of 66. Uh, and so I kind of knew people. I knew my grouping from Ogons. I knew my grouping from my cousin. Okay. Uh, so I kind of again, I was always telling people I had an advantage because I was there. I kind of knew. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew that, that kind of stuff. I mean, I had other things I wasn't sure of, but I knew some things I was very sure of, and that was one of them. So it was great. It was great. It was a great experience, and I never forget uh, I think the thing that kind of shaped me into preparation for college as an African American was the fact that um, my dad and my mom and I went to in 57, long time ago, we went to Canada for 3 weeks, and we could not stay in some of the hotels in Clayton, New York, and Watertown, New York. I think it was Watertown, New York. So by the time we got to Ottawa, my mother was a nervous wreck. She was like, we should need to turn around. My father was like, turn around? We're not turning around. And so one of the things that I never forget is that we went to I guess the innkeeper and said to him something that my father did. Or is there a problem with our color? And the innkeeper said to, yeah, if you don't have green, it's a problem. Okay. In other words, we need money. So that kind of, my dad was always, you go where you have to go. Go where you think you want to go, and let other people worry about what they're doing. Okay. So I kind of took that into stride and try to do that as I still do to this day. You know, it's not my problem. It's your problem. Okay. Okay. If you don't want me here, I'm here. Okay. Deal with it. Okay. So
So
that's
how
how.
did that kind of shape your first term at Penn State before in attending the Commonwealth campus? How did that, knowing that you belonged in a space, shape your idea in going to college? Not your idea in going to college, but your experience in getting to the college campus. And then when you went to main campus, the fall, I think, or winter of '66, how did that kind of, shape that I belong here, even though people don't want me here? I know I belong in this place, and I'm good enough to be here.
Well, the strangest thing, I never forget calling my mother and saying to my mother, when I got to main campus, now, there, even the housekeepers and the trash collectors are white. Okay. And that was like, golly, they're white. Okay. Everybody's white here. Okay. But I don't forget, I'd already known that because I had been up there maybe 12 times. I kid you not, 12 times before I even got there. So the Ogons experience again was that, the six of us who went to Ogons from summer. I started in summer of 65. I graduated in January, March of 65. I started in summer of 65. And the six of us kind of uh, relied on each other, kind of supported each other, and really didn't. We had some connection with other people, but we kind of relied on each other a lot because we came there in the car, we left in the car. There were certain times we had to be there, so we kind of try to broaden ourselves um, with ourselves as opposed to broaden everybody else. So it really wasn't a culture shock for me. I guess that's what happens for a lot of people. In my conversation, it was a culture shock to come up to Penn State and see so many white people. It wasn't a real culture shock for me because I already knew. I had done my stats. I already knew how many people of color were there. Not many. Okay. But again, this is where I wanted to go. And the other reason I really chose Penn State is because it was one of the few schools then that had a Bachelor of Social Work degree. Many schools didn't have that in 65, 66. And because I wanted to be a social worker, that's why I decided to definitely go to Penn State. So that was my experience there.
Yeah, that shock still exists for, a lot of students at Penn State still today, even in, talking, having friends who came from inner cities such as Philadelphia or, other inner cities, and saying,
Right.
this is my first time having an interaction with all of, white people. So it definitely is a different experience. So when you got to main campus,
Hmm.
where did you live, and what were some of the things that you got involved with?
Okay. I lived in Rittner at that time. Uh,
Okay, Pollock.
okay. Yes. Uh, I got involved in, I got involved in the dance club, of course. It's called Senior Orchesis. It was called senior orchestras. I don't know what it's called now, but it was called senior orchestras. So I got involved in the dance club, um, which there was one of, I think was one of the big sister when I started pledging. She was in the dance club, in the orchestras dance club, which was a performing group. We went to different campuses, different colleges, and performed. So of course, then that interaction was there. Um, then I became a junior resident. Had a little problem because it was myself and another person. We ran against each other, and I won. And this dorm, I think there were only 3 blacks in this dorm in Whitner at the time, and she was a white woman, girl. And she, when I went to the bathroom, I heard her call me the N word. And so I'm like, she did not call me that word. Okay. And so I went in and I said, are you talking about me or to me? And no, 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 yes, 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 yes. I don't see anybody else here that could possibly be, you know. So I kind of decided then that I would zoom in more on what people were saying and listening to what um, I think that made me even more so decide that when I went into the class and I was the only black person in the class, I had to almost like, here we go, take a couple of breaths and then walk to the front of the class and sit down as opposed to walking anyplace else. So I always sat in the front. If I were the only black there in the class, which many times I was, I sat in the front of the class. And that, of course, that was just symbolic of whatever, but it still made me feel better. So I kind of try to understand that it's a lot of times how you deal with people is how you feel about yourself and how you're going to put yourself forward and how you're going to charge through even though you may not want to. It's strange because I'm sorry, I have to go over here to something. Keeps going on. It's strange because there was James, there's a quote by James Baldwin. I'm not even sure what the quote is, where it's from, but he talks about uh, sometimes facing adversities, but if you don't face them, you'll never know that they're there. So it's a quote by James Baldwin that kind of talks about just going head on into what you have to do, going head on and keep on going, as opposed to sitting back and wondering, I wonder, oh my, what do they think about me? What do I, more so, I'm supposed to be here. Okay. I'm paying my money like you're paying your money. Okay. And and here I am. So that was kind of my attitude. And then dealing with the theater a lot of times at Penn State and even at home, you meet a lot of different people. It's a theatrical, still don't get me wrong, still always the racism and always that kind of stuff is there. But you kind of join by the arts. And so the arts is a different kind of ball game altogether. People kind of take you based on um, not who you are, but what you're portraying, especially if you're in the theater. So that kind of helped. No, I didn't say stopped it, but it helped some. Made me feel better. And a lot of times, that's basically what it's about. It's about you feeling good about yourself, and you going right in there, and and this is my path. This is what I want to take. And sorry you're in my way, but too bad. Okay.
So did you have any unsettling experiences with any of your professors, noting that you were the only African American in the classroom? Was it just kind of students, you kind of felt that pressure of we don't want you here, or was it also within, the professors and things that they would say to you, or in whether it be, grading or whatever it may.
Right. Not that I can recall. I'm sure there was. I'm sure there was I had a black roommate. So that eliminated that little problems, that possibly could come up. The roommate was a person who had gone to high school with me, and and then after she left and got a single room, I had another black roommate who who I pledged who pledged with me, not with me, but around the same time. So if I had those kind of experiences, I had a safe haven to come back to. And so sometimes, racism is so overt, you don't even know it's there sometimes. and unless you're looking hard for it. And many times I didn't want to look for it because, it's there. I know it's there. And if I look for it, I'm going to find more things. So how I dealt with my next door neighbors who would come in, and maybe my next door neighbor who was white, who was from Minnesota, would come in, and she would say things, nice girl, she would say things like, in my hometown, my relatives think that uh, of course there was colored people then, or Negroes, had tails, and my retort always was, now you're in college now. I know you're not stupid. I know that that's such a fallacy. Okay. I know you're intelligent enough to know that that is not true. So even if they kind of thought it, I tried to shame them into like, please don't do that. Okay. Uh, and then I had some uh, folks on the floor who were into folk music, and I was like, and I had a lot. I was into folk music, and they were into, and we'll talk about. They were into SDS, Students for Democratic Society, and so they were always activists. So there was always a lot of activism in my room. Maybe not the same type of activism, but activism anyway. So.
So, what place did you find yourself, or a placement in student activism at the time? Did you join any of the organizations such as the Douglas Association or any other? I know you mentioned you joined a sorority, and
Right.
I'm not sure if your sorority contributed to activism or not, but did that kind of get you involved in some form of student activism and demonstrations that were held at the time?
You're right. Well, you know, they didn't have any demonstrations in '66, but I belonged to CORE, which is the Congress of Racial Equality at that time. And CORE didn't last very long on Penn State's campus. It had been there before. I don't actually don't know how long it had been there. But when I got there, it kind of disbanded around the end of '67. Um, and I think it disbanded. And of course, the Douglas Association, when that came about, of course, I joined that. Um, I think I kind of dropped out of CORE because a lot of the members of CORE were trying to were dealing with eventually dropping out of society, alienating themselves, especially like SCS, alienating themselves, and we were trying to drop into society. So it became, CORE at that time, and many campuses were predominantly white, and it was in the northern part of the campuses, and they had gone down south to do freedom rides and that kind of stuff. So I think that again, because they were trying to eventually um, dropping out of society, everything against society. I don't want anything to do with society. We're part of society, and we're in, and this is us. So CORE kind of lost its momentum for CORE members. I mean, for the members, white and black, I think. And eventually it kind of dissolved itself. I don't even know what happened to CORE um, at the time. But I was in that. I was in the, of course, jazz club, um, um, and again, or the dancing group. There was always a dancing group. I worked on campus. Now let me say that I did have an experience. I worked at I think it was Whalen's drugstore at the time. I don't even think it's there any longer. And it was on campus. I'm sure it's not. And it got so that I started, by working there, I started opening up the store on Sundays. Um, and a few of the patrons no longer wanted to come in the store because I was opening up the store. I do remember that hearing my boss say something to them, well, then don't come in. So that was a strange little time, but they never said it to me, but but of course I knew it. So working on the campus, of course, also gave me a indirect and direct rather contact with white folks who I saw in their worst light sometime, and sometimes in their best light, but a lot of times in their worst light. Okay, so worst light kind of said to me, I see them still a little better. Okay, in my approach, in my outlook, still a little a little more worldly than you are. So again, it gave me a kind of a upmanship, you know, to my thoughts, and so that helped some. Um, I guess that was it for that.
So
Um,
the Douglas Association, when you joined, where did you find your placement in that organization. I know they held like wrap-ins and they had, demonstrations, and a lot of the demonstrations probably happened after following your graduation. But even in some of the discussions, and some of the discussions that took place in 1968 following Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. What was the climate of the university like at that time on campus?
Well, on campus, I think the 68 was the montage. What we decided to do, a few of us who were in the arts decided, forget what we were we cues, were we this, were we that, but let's talk about who we are, as Black people on this campus. So we got together and we decided to do what I consider a precursor to the Black Arts Festival. Because at the time, the Black Arts movement was very big. Amir Barak and Toni Morrison was involved in that, Nikki Giovanni, Nina Simone. So there were a lot of people who were outside in the art world. And so what we did was we tied together um, a lot of the experiences and made it into a montage, and we called it a day in the life, which was the life of a Black person um, in their world. I was a choreographer because, of course, I had done dance. I was a choreographer, and I got together a lot of people who were dancers, and we practiced. And so it was a wonderful time. Of course, we were just coming off of Martin Luther King being assassinated. I think, was he assassinated on the 4th? Yeah, assassinated. So it was in April 4th. And so we decided that we were not going to have any white people involved, of course, in anything, not in the technical part. And I'm not mistaken, I don't even think they were allowed inside. And we didn't even tape. And we always say later on, why didn't we tape that? That was not a smart move, okay? But what it did was it made us kind of see that, boy, we really as a group can do things together. And so I think that was really the beginning of knowing that we've got to be a one unit in order to, it's not only necessary, but we're intrinsically together. We're one. And so that oneness then became expressed in the theater, in the theater groups. So in the Douglas Association, that was the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority and the Douglas Association, they combined to do that montage. But it was called a day in the life. But again, we decided that we were not going to, we didn't really care too much about what you were again. And so out of that, the presidents, at the time I was the president of the sorority, Delta Sigma Theta sorority, and we started a Cato actually, it was the Alpha Kappa Alpha, the five Greeks, and an independent, because we realized everybody is not going to pledge, and everybody does not want to pledge, and that's okay. And so we had a representative, and we met. We were supposed to meet monthly, but it kind of went every other month. We met, we discussed things, we pulled our monies together so that when we had different kind of things, instead of us having you pay the money, this group pays money, we paid all money together when we went to Skimont. I don't know if Skimont was a ski lodge that was up near the Ku Klux Klan area. So we actually pulled together, not just because of monetarily, but because of support for each other and to make sure that we were safe. And so we did that, and we had a representative, and that it was wonderful. I don't know if that remained. I don't think it stayed, but I know the time I was there, it stayed up until the time I graduated in March of '69, and again we started that in the fall of '68. So we had meetings, and so out of that Akata came I think from the idea of, wow, they can kill Dr. Martin Luther King. Of course, we always knew they could kill us. So we better do something and band together and become one. And so again, I always tell students when I was counselor and a social worker. There was no time like the 60s. I know everybody says, oh, yeah, yeah, everybody says that, but it wasn't, because it really was a time of awakening and reckoning with each other. And, um, and some of those friendships even last now, are still going on, no matter what the groupings are. Okay. So it was
So,
kind of a good time. Good time.
so out of the Cato, how did that unity bring, African Americans together in a sense of, like, whether it be um, organizing for certain events or going to certain events? Like, how did that unity bring forth even greater change on the campus per se?
Well, I think we started looking at things uh, as a as a catalyst for other things. Um, again, the Douglas Association again was made up of many of the students of color on the campus, regardless of where of what organization you belong to. So it was less talk about the Greek organization and more talk about the organization, the Douglas Association. What legacy do we want to leave for those that are coming after us? Um, do we want to be known for? And even though it was necessary to do some sit-ins, of which I missed a lot of things because I had gone early, um, the feeling was still there. I never forget after the montage, kind of us kind of crying together and kind of like, wow, we did it. We couldn't believe it. We had done something that we had read about in the New York papers in the art world and that kind of stuff. So we were proud of ourselves. And of course, when you're proud of yourself, um, you have a different stance about yourself. You have a different idea, and you hold yourself differently, and you hold yourself accountable to many things, so that later on in life, someone can look back as you're doing and say, wow, there were some blacks there who were really doing some things at the time. And it wasn't just all about marching around the tree and stepping higher and higher. It was more about um, um, grabbing somebody and pulling them up with you. Okay. So it was that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Uh,
So I want to touch back on Greek life and how that added a social life for you on campus. So if you would mention what sorority you're a part of, and just kind of how that led to your social life. And it was one of the other interviewees mentioned that it was kind of a place of comfort and home and support and encouragement for a lot of African American students. Like, the Black Greek organizations were like, they found um, home, they found comfort, they just found themselves able to be, themselves without having to be anybody else. Yeah.
right. And especially for the fact that we had a suite. Most of the men had a house, the women had suites. Um, the two female black organizations at that time. And so the suite was just like a suite, like a home. You could come in, you could relax, and no matter what happened during that day, you could talk. There was somebody around who could talk. You could talk to, who you could relate to, who understood the same kind of things you did. And again, it just so happens that the person happened to be a Delta or happened to be an AKA, but it could have been interchangeable. I never forget the fact that it was this funny thing. I have a friend who's the other sorority, and I went over there to do something with her, say something with her, or something. And we were rushed at the same time, but we pledged to different sororities. And I came back, and I might have been pledging then. I think I was pledging then. Because I pledged very long, pledged then, and someone said, "Oh, were you over at the other suite? Mm-hmm. You were over there?" And I said, you mean the other suite? You mean out of my room, the room that my mother and father are paying for? Is that the room you're talking about?" I had to bring them back a little bit because it was getting a little, come on. I always say that I think the Penn State of my time was a little different than the Penn State a little before, and I'm just generalizing, of course, and a little after. I think the majority of folks in my age grouping, were first generation college students. I think again, I'm generalizing, the grouping prior to us in the 60s, 60 may have been second generation. They may have had someone relative who was in college, who was, so it was a different kind of ball game. It was almost like, boy, we're doing this, we're really setting some groundwork for our family, whereas we're continuing the legacy before, and that makes a difference sometimes. And I'm I'm talking group wise, but it makes a difference on how you deal with things and how you look at things. And again, it was the times, the early 60s on that campus, as opposed to maybe at North Carolina A&T, which was very different, or the Black campuses. Were already involved, especially down south. They were involved in those kind of things because the South, of course, had a lot of, even though had a lot of open wounds that was the fabric of society for them. The North had a different, that they were a little more subtle in what was going on. So I think that in the 60s, early 60s, the idea was we're here. Wow, we're at the white campus. Wow, look how lucky we are. Later on, it was we're here. We're at the white campus. Look how lucky you are to have us here. To add to another dimension to what's going on with this whole world. I think that was a big difference.
Yeah.
And then after with you guys, of course, it becomes, and then it changes with you with in each generation. And I said something one time. Someone said someone had to go home because someone called them the N word, and they were so upset they had to go home, and they almost tried to kill themselves. And we were like, a disgrace. We were like, how dare you try to kill yourself because someone called you a name? So it was like, is that a weakness? And I talk to younger people, and they're like, "Oh, Miss Rouse, people, we look at everybody. Everybody's the same. I don't think you're gonna marry a Kennedy, and I don't think you're gonna marry. Okay, everyone's not the same. Let's be real clear about that. Okay, you might, and everybody, we're middle class. As a social worker, I have this problem with this middle class thing, and I understand it's the stratification, but I'm like, I don't think you're the Johnsons of Jet magazine. That's maybe more middle class. You're not necessarily middle class. Okay, you're middle income, maybe. You got a little money, which you could lose tomorrow. So let's be clear about this. Okay, it can come and go. It can come and go. Okay, very quickly, and so that's a big difference, I think.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to jump to kind of the ending of your college experience at Penn State. So the arts festival, you are an artist in yourself and you like the arts. So how did that event speak to the things that you were interested with, especially with the music and the speakers and the Black poets who were able to come? Like, how did that, you know,
Yeah.
kind of end your college career?
Well, actually, I had in '67. I was I did my internship, actually practicum, they call it, for social work in New York. I always try to get paid practicums, even when I went back to school for my master's. I always try to get practicums that would pay me some money. And so I lived in New York in '67 in the summer and '68, both summers. And of course, I went to the theater and those kind of things. And I was lucky enough to work for um, the Florence Crittenton League, which was a residential home for girls in the Lower East Side. And I was the assistant recreation leader, but the recreation leader fell and broke her leg. So I became the recreation leader. And a lot of these girls were like only 4 or 5 years younger than me. They were adjudicated uh, from the courts. And so they lived in this home. They didn't live in a family setting. This was their family setting. The next year I went, I was a uh, house mother. And so I kind of saw that even though I was at an advantage because I was in college and I was moving ahead, um, I saw the disenfranchised uh, folks, and so it kind of made me think to myself, boy, this could be taken away any minute. You could. It's nice to go to college. It's wonderful, but it doesn't define you. Okay, it doesn't define you at all. Um, so I think that being in New York, of course, always being in the theater, always going to, even when I was in high school, my last year of high school, I went on my days off, which was Wednesday, not my last year of high school. I guess it was January to June because I graduated in January. So January to June, I worked at the Bell Telephone Company, which everybody did. Worked at the telephone company, met different people, and I met a few students who were going to Temple, and who happened to be white, and they liked the theater, and so we would go up on our days off and hit a play. Uh, so I was always interested in plays, and again, as I told you, my mother, she kind of, I think she was living vicariously through me. She kind of, she kind of, um, she didn't push me because my mother wasn't a pusher. My mother, she was always made me very independent. That you make your bed hard, you lie in it. You do these things. You are they're for you, not for me. They're for you, but they were for her too, actually. Because she was getting as much joy out of these things as myself, and plays and taking the train. So by the time I had gotten to Penn State, I was kind of um, artistically sound in what I needed to do and what I wanted to do. And theater was always my secondary love besides social work. And I continue with it today. I'm still taking dance lessons periodically. Um, I still, whenever there's a class, I try to take a dance class. I did choreography for community theater here in Philadelphia. So so I just kind of extended that and made it into and a job in which a part-time job in which I got paid for. So I think that the whole idea of the montage was really the precursor, as I said before, of the Black Arts Festival, of the Black Arts, not necessarily the Black Arts Festival, but Black Arts in that community. Okay. That's yeah.
Could you describe your favorite part of Arts Fest, if there was one or many? And one of the stories that you vividly remember about Arts Fest that kind of, I don't know if you enjoyed it or hopefully you did, but
Yeah. Well, I think it was besides being a choreographer, I also danced in one of these scenes, and I tried to pick someone who I knew was interested in theater, but was not definitely was not in a fraternity, and to dance with me, so that because I kind of felt that this person was very interested. I was very astute at picking people who zooming in on people for their creative abilities and trying to bring that out. And I really do believe that that's one of my um, fortitudes. I'm kind of able to bring out people's best as far as the art world. Uh, so the one thing I remember more than anything is that the fact that again afterwards we kind of like cried with each other, and we were so happy. And even today, uh, um, one of the friends, I think you might have interviewed Cynthia.
yeah.
Yes, we got together when she was here about 4 or 5 months ago, and we talked about the Black Arts Festival and how much fun we had and what we did, how much work it was, but how it was all worth it in the end, and how we were proud of ourselves. So I think it was a sense of pride, and I think at that time, folks had to, even if you didn't understand all the works, even if you weren't familiar with all the works of all these literary Black geniuses, you had an appreciation of it, and it made you want to find out more. What more can we do? What more can we say about this? What are they really saying about this? And what's their background about this? How did they get to this point? So it became a knowledge base for the arts, for me, and for those I hope that came in contact with the program.
So you mentioned earlier that your dad kind of did work for Sidney Poitier and Ruby D, and I don't remember the other person's name, but
Yeah, Auntie Davis.
no, okay. So knowing that Ruby D ended up coming to Penn State during Arts Fest, wasn't it? I think
Not my
I think it
time.
was
I
not
missed
in your
everything.
time. Oh, okay. So, but he ended up coming to Penn State. But knowing that your father, kind of worked for them, how did that Like, how was that? Did you get an opportunity to meet them, or how did that kind of inspire you to continue on in your, your desirings of working as a choreographer for Arts Fest and the montage and, just being involved in the theater at the university?
Well, I I got their autographs, and and because my dad was working on the weekends and would come home on work on the weekday and would come home on the weekend. So I did get an autograph, and I was like, take me up there with you, okay? I think they lived in Mount Vernon at that time, and he was doing some work with a company in Mount Vernon. I did meet them because after I left Penn State, maybe a year and a half later, I applied for the Negro Ensemble Company Apprentice Program in New York, and they were one of the patrons of that. So when they came, I showed them the autograph, and they was like, "Oh, yeah, I remember Ed." They probably didn't remember him, but I remember Ed. Yeah, he did some work for us, in the like 63, 64. So that whole thing kind of led me into, again, the Negro Ensemble Company, which was a famous black theatrical company that's no longer in existence, started by Douglas Turner Ward. And I would go up to New York after I started working, because I started working maybe a month after I graduated. I would go up to New York, take the train back. On weekends, I would stay with one of my sorors who's a little older, who lived in New York, and I did that for 9 months, until the program was over. And the idea of that was that we were supposed to be the next group in line when the older establishment died out. Robert Hooks died out, and when Rosalind Cash and some of these folks died out. And I'm still waiting. I was like, well, what happened with that? Because they never called our grouping. But it was supposed to be a precursor to being in the legitimate theater. So as again, I continued with not just the choreography, but I got very interested in theater and the aspect of theater, mostly black theater, but sometimes theater that bordered on white Shakespearean theater and that kind of things. Um, so it did help me. The other thing that besides my dad, it was the strangest thing because my mother had a hairdresser, and this was I was like 7 or 8 or 9, and when she would go over there, I would go with her, and this woman could recite all Paul Laurence Dunbar's poems in dialect. And one was called The Party, and that's a very long, if you're familiar with that, a very, very long um, piece that is in dialect. She could pronounce, she had the whole thing. She would do it all the time. She would talk about it. So my mom and I would come back and I was like, what is she talking about? And my mom bought me a book about Paul Laurence Dunbar and the dialect. And my mother says, I don't even know what they're talking about. It's so really you know, into the dialect. Later on, I went to the Gullah Islands in South Carolina, which still retained a lot of their speech patterns of their African culture. So it kind of made me, again, want to know more about what was going on as far as, the theater, what was going on, and, as far as how I could use my Penn State information uh, to better myself, either uh, uh, artistically and I guess socially also.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as we kind of wrap the interview up, I do have a yeah a,
Wow.
a yeah 10 more minutes, but I do have a few final questions about legacy and like lifetime. So the
Mhm.
first one, after you graduated Penn State, did you ever think to look back, or did you desire to return back to Penn State for any event at that time, or did you just kind of just say, okay, I graduated, now I'm going forth, I'm not looking back?
Well, what happened was that there are about 10 of us that still, for the last 50 years maybe, have gotten together. We decided that we would extend ourselves. So our children, when they graduated, we made a big deal about it. My mother used to say, you guys are still playing house, huh? Yeah, we're still playing house. We always had skits. We always had, and we're still doing it. We always had skits. We have barbecues every year for the last, with the exception of maybe the last 4 years, we had Kwanzaa. We invited folks in. So the need really to go back wasn't there. A few of my friends who were not necessarily in my sorority were still friends of mine. I'm the godchild of one of their daughters. And so it became a great support system. I did go back. Um, we went back. A few of us went back about maybe 12 years ago. It's a shame. We went back on a Friday. We left on a Saturday. We were like, we gotta go. We're not happy. I know. We were like, that was a short trip. Okay, but we were so tickled. We got in the car. We were like, now why did we drive up here? But we did go back a couple of years ago to the Black Alumni
Mm-hmm.
reunion. And we had the hardest time. I had the hardest time getting people to go back. Oh, well, I don't feel like it. I don't want to go back. Because I think groupings get together all the time. The Qs get together with their groupings all the time. The Kappa. So groupings got together, so they didn't see the need to really go up. But when I went up there and came back, I said to them, the young folks need us. They need to see us. They need to know that we're here. And besides, it was no, we needed you all because we could relate, but we really couldn't, besides Rick was there. Rick was like, anybody else coming? We're like, just the three of us. The three of us for that age grouping. There were some older, a couple older adults that came and a couple older AKs that came, but mostly it was the people who graduated from I would say 80 on up. And they were, because I think they're the people who kind of summed that up. And so we went back then, but we were really trying on going back. We decided, I was calling people from various groups and I said, listen, you've got to get this word out so we can have a really good time when we go up there. Let's go up there in mass in a group. They were like, okay, well, think about it. I mean, and there's a big reluctance to go back up to Penn State for most people. And people were like, I didn't have a good experience at Penn State. I said, but we're talking. We're still, that's the experience, the friendship. Use that experience to motivate you. So without this COVID coming, we probably would have gone back up. They probably would have this time. But we're going to work on it, trying to get them to zoom in and go back up.
That would be awesome.
Yeah,
I'll join too. I'll come back.
Hey, I met some wonderful when I was up there. Wonderful young people who I took some pictures with, and they were like, wow, tell us about your experience there. They were very interested in the experience. So this is why it's a great thing that you're doing, because it kind of shows that there is an interest. And I think with the interest, I'm almost making people feel bad. I'm almost shaming them. I'm like, don't let the younger people have no one to fall back on. So you need to go up there. Okay, all right. It's that kind of thing. So I'm trying to shame them into going back. Okay. But again, I think it's not so much because of the experience, but because we get together anyway. Maybe at some artistic things like the art shows down in the Center City. I see some people who went to Penn State who are, who happen to be in art or not necessarily theater, but who are made like Rick is in the social worker. I am. We belong to the Black Association of Black Social Workers at one time. So I always saw him. I always saw a few other people. So I think the need. I'm seeing. It's almost like I'm seeing people I need to see. The 8 of us, the 10 of us, we go on trips together. We go different places together. So I think that's why we're not always pushed. And then everybody didn't have the same kind of experience. So even though they might have been in a sorority, fraternity, and it was a friendship, they didn't have the same kind of bond feeling of we're in this. We're always once we're in this, we're always in this. That was it.
Okay. So for the final question, and I'm going to put 2 into 1.
Okay.
Like I said, just due to the time.
Yeah.
So when you look back and you reflect upon legacy and your involvement in the arts and Montage and other, large events such as Arts Fest that were held at your time at Penn State, what legacy do you think that you left at Penn State, and kind of what does legacy mean to you? And then, well, that's kind of That's one question. And
Right.
then the second question is, if you could phrase up your college experience in maybe one word, what would it be and why?
One word. Ooh. Well, the legacy, I think, is that I like to think of the montage as a legacy, but also the idea that no matter what, you're always on the backs of others.
Mm,
This, as we can see from this day, nothing has really changed. In fact, it's going back to that again. Uh, so you're always on the backs of others. You're always here because of others. Uh, um, and I always tell young people, don't forget that. If it weren't for other people, you would not be here. Because they set a groundwork, they did things, and of course, we're always talking about the activists. Again, the Emmett Tills, the Fannie Lou Hamers, those people who were um, frontline folks who gave their lives and gave their voices to what we were doing. The one word.
or a phrase.
Okay, well, mine would be my time at friendships. I mean, my time at Penn State were friendships um, amongst discontent. And I
Mm,
say that because not just discontent of what was going on, what is going on now, but because in 67 and 68, when I came back in the fall after leaving New York, I was very discontent with Penn State. It was a small town. It was almost like I had gone to New York and now I had to come back to Penn State. I wasn't a happy person. I mean, I was happy about my friendships, and I zoomed in on those, and I kept those, and I tried to maintain them and fortify them. But I was never really happy because, of course, I had been to New York, and now, and so to, and so this is not the question. I'm going a little more, but I decided 8 years after I graduated, I was going back to school, and I was going to go to a HBCU. So I went to Howard for school of social work. And I lived in the dorm. I was like 30 years old, living in the dorm, and I was among social work students. And I had the best time of my life because I was in a
mm,
big town. I was social, but at the same time, I became the treasurer of the school of social of my class. So I still did a lot of things. I joined the jazz club there. I didn't join the dance club there because they were didn't have the real time, but it was just a different kind of time, and that was like in the middle, the end of 70s, 77, 76. So I think that propelled me to go to a school where I can see my own everywhere, not just somewhere, but everywhere. And when people complain about maybe how it was doing so, oh, they're so slow. I was like, I don't care. I'm happy to be here. I don't care how slow they are. Okay. Just take it with a grain of salt. Happy, happy, happy. So I was really, really happy to be at Howard. Okay. I would have been happy to be in any black college. I'll be truthful with you. Not because I hated Penn State, but because it was something missing that
mm-hmm.
HBCUs gave me. Okay. Um, and I was older, so I could appreciate it more. Basically, yeah.
Okay. Friendships, you said a miss discontent, correct?
A miss friendships. Mine would be friendships. A miss the fall of discontent because
The
everything
fall of
happened when I came
discontent.
back in the fall. I was like, I'm not content. I can hardly wait till I go back. It's such that I even took a little pay cut the next year, which was only $25 a week. So how much of a cut can you take? But I took a pay cut the next year just to be there and
Mm,
just to be able to go to the festivals and to the Rhine Guard and seeing all the people, Diana Ross, for free because we got free tickets. And even though I was in charge of maybe 14 girls, I realized then that I wanted to work in social work. There are different ways you can work in social work. I wanted to work with students and with children. So I went back to school again for the masters in social work. But then I became a counselor, so I had to be certified because in Pennsylvania at that time you couldn't become a counselor unless you were certified, even if you had an MSW. So I had to go back to Westchester and become certified, and so I retired as a counselor slash social worker from a elementary middle school. So I kind of went full circle, and I was satisfied with my career.
mm.
Right, satisfied with myself in my career. Yeah.
That is amazing. And you should have corrected me on your introduction. You got your PhD, so doctor.
Not PhD.
Oh, okay.
I went back to Westchester for certification,
Okay.
not a PhD. No.
Okay.
So it's just someone said, well, you should get another master's, you can get the, where am I getting another master's from? I'm only going because you're making me go, because
Yeah.
actually, you know, and it's so much that my principal said to me, you're running, I like what you're doing. You're running this like a community center. So I had, at my school as a counselor, and I was the only counselor for 700 students. I ran it so that there was
Wow.
a resource. Certain days there were resources for folks to support folks that came in from other agencies. Or I ran it for, I had like ADHD and groupings for students who were in this foster care system. So I had, I did things for people who were the aides. I did a day for student aides, a day for the administrative assistants, a day for assistants to the teachers. So things that kind of made everybody in the school feel welcome and part of what was going on. So I really
Mm.
worked hard on doing that. And you know, still I have friends who were in the school who would call me sometime at another school and say, I need you to come over and help with the career day. I'm retired, not coming to help. But they let me know, okay, but I need you to run it. I said, no, we're not running it. Okay. And then was in charge of the performing arts at my school for 12 years. I was at the school for 15 years. For 12 years, I was a performing arts director. So staff and student talent shows and that kind of stuff. So I try to take that art and extend it through my whole life.
Wow. Well, as I can see, it has gone and it still continues to go forth that, in your career and in your involvement. And even in when I think about legacy, even in leaving a legacy for other people, knowing for the next generation to come within the arts and even as you mentioned within social work, just being that foundation for other people to kind of like step on to get to the next place. So Miss Rouse, I just want to say thank you so much for this time and it has been I can't like I'm so grateful to just have the opportunity to just sit and listen to your story, but also um, be trusted enough to share it with others because it is something that is going to help the next generation, whether it be people in the arts or whether it be students or faculty who are still at the university. But I just am truly grateful and I just want to say thank you so much for this time.
Well, thank you for doing this and for always remembering that it sounds so 60s, but the struggle continues. Okay.
Mm,
It has not stopped. It continues, and so we need folks to continue that struggle. And I'm so grateful for you and for folks like you who are take the time to understand how important it is to talk about legacies and talk about what things were like and what they are now. So thank you.
yes.